Let's talk some sports, baby.
Taken by Iguodala. Iguodala to Curry. Back to Iguodala. Up for the layup. Oh, blocked by Jones.
And remember, make tomorrow better than today, and make today better than yesterday. And you know what we gonna do. We gonna holler at you until next time, baby.
All right, fellas, it's time to continue our NFL draft previews. Today we head to the North Division, starting in the AFC North. Cincinnati holds the cards of the first overall pick in this year's draft, and is expected to draft LSU's Joe Burrow. Browns and Steelers look to improve after lackluster 2019 campaigns, and Baltimore hopes to land a piece or two that'll keep them in Super Bowl contention. So, Drake, let's start at the top with Cincinnati at number 1. Who you got?
Oh yeah, so I mean, you said it so eloquent in the lead in. We know what the deal is. Hey, Cincinnati gonna take Joe Burrow. If they don't take Joe Burrow, it's gonna be some smoke in the city. You best believe it. It's gonna be like when LeBron left Cleveland the first time. It's gonna be some burning. But with my next position, I'm gonna go with the offensive line. You're gonna have to have some big uglies to protect your highly coveted asset, Joe Burrow. And I'm looking at one Ben Cleveland out of Georgia. That was one of those. We remember how massive that Georgia offensive line was. He was one of those guys that probably, fell in the weeds in between, the Andrew Thomas and the other guys, So I'm looking at Ben Cleveland. Also, I'm looking at the guy, another Ben Batch out of St. John's. I'm looking at him. He looks as a guy that could come in, be a day one starter when you look at him. And then the third position, I went with edge rusher. And when I think about edge rusher, look, let's be honest here. The Bengals they need a lot. You can't name them all, but edge rusher, I think we always talk about the pecking order of the importance of positions. I look at edge rusher. I'm looking at this guy, Jason Strawbridge, coming out of the University of North Carolina. A under the radar pick, but listen, we'll see how it goes. It is what it is. He's not one of those highly coveted edge rushers, but I do think he could be a day 2 or 3 pick, not day 1, but a day 2 or 3 pick. And then I'm looking at the guy, DJ Warren out of South Carolina, one of those guys. He kind of got overshadowed by Kinlaw in the defensive line, but listen, it is what it is. He strikes me more as a day 4, 5, 6 type of guy, but I do think he's a guy that could come in and improve that pass rush of the Cincinnati Bengals tremendously. So, yeah, I went quarterback, offensive line, edge rusher.
Yeah, with you 100% on the quarterback spot, and that's where they'll go number 1. It could be Joe Burrow. It will be Joe Burrow, but I'm going to go ahead and throw it out there. If I was running a team, I'd take Tua Tagovailoa, but Cincinnati doesn't have any guts, so they'll take the safe pick. They'll take the Ohio kid. It'll be nice, Joe Burrow. I like the offensive line pick, although I would say they spent a pretty high pick on Jonah Williams last year. Is that correct?
They did. But okay. I would say this. Now, we're talking about this year they're going for tackle. Last time I checked, they drafted Jonas Williams as a tackle, but they want to move him into guard because of his arm length. So they'll be looking for a tackle. Okay.
And with that being said, you're right. There's probably more work to do on that offensive line. I'm looking at linebacker. I'm thinking about the Cincinnati Bengals right now, and I'm just thinking about their history with middle linebackers, inside linebackers. I feel like it's been since Vontaze Burfict, since they really had an impact guy in there that could make plays and do stuff for you from that position. So with that being said, I don't want a guy who's engaging in all the the headshots that we see from Vontaze Burfict. I want to see a little bit more clean stuff, but maybe you go for a guy like Malik Harrison out of Ohio State. Get a guy who can go sideline to sideline for you, make plays all over the field. Maybe it's a Jordan Brooks from Texas Tech. Maybe you look at one of those guys. And my third need, I'm looking at the tight end position. I know he was injured about 75% of the time. That's just an arbitrary figure. Don't put any stock in that. I don't know how many games he missed, but he missed a lot. Cody's about to find out about that when he makes his way into Jacksonville with a splint on his toe or something. But hey,
what we got.
we talk about Joe Burrow and all these guys from LSU not coming with him. Well, maybe you can get a guy in the later rounds at the tight end position in the Thaddeus Moss. Maybe you bring him in and you get a little security blanket in there, give him some familiarity, bringing somebody from LSU. So I would think about that if I'm the Cincinnati Bengals. So quarterback, inside linebacker, and tight end. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, no argument here. Joe Burrow is definitely going to be the pick. I sure they're going to keep their phone on for potential trades, but my God, I mean, it would take an absolute king's ransom. They should accept nothing less than a king's ransom to move down in the draft. So more than likely, like you said, they're a pretty safe organization. They'll take Burrow. I'm always a fan of getting a wide receiver with your quarterback. You draft this new quarterback. You do have A.J. Green coming back on the franchise tag, but he's had some injury concerns. And after Tyler Boyd, you don't really have much else at wide receiver. John Ross hasn't really panned out. And a couple of these other guys are just sort of backups. So I always like the pairing of getting a number one pick quarterback, and then you go back in the beginning of the second round and you grab yourself a wide receiver. And then I like the Thaddeus Moss pick a lot. That's actually really interesting. They get him in the later rounds. Tight end's not another position they're kind of thin at. All right, Jay, let's go ahead and go over to the Browns. They got 7 picks and the 10th overall pick. What you got for them?
Yeah, I'm looking at Cleveland's a team where I think they had a pretty good free agency. I think the last several years they've done a really good job infusing that roster with serious talent. There's still a little bit of work to do on the offensive line, and that's where I think they go in the first round. I think when you bring in Jack Conklin at the right tackle, you got that position solidified. Now I think you look at the left side. I'm thinking about a guy from Georgia, Andrew Thomas, guy who has been a stalwart on that offensive line for several years now. If you want to go in the later rounds, maybe you go Damian Lewis down at LSU. I think that was my pick for if they go interior on the offensive line. Maybe you get him opposite Joe Bitonio at the other guard position. I'm also thinking about inside linebacker. I look at the losses they've had this offseason. Joe Schobert exiting to Jacksonville, and you lost Christian Kirksey to Green Bay. So there's a need there at the inside linebacker position. I'm thinking about a guy who can, again, sideline to sideline from inside linebacker. I'm looking at Troy Dye out of Oregon. That's a guy I'm thinking about for that position. And then I'm also looking at safety. I'm looking at the additions they made. You bring in Carl Joseph. You bring in Andrew Sendejo. Those are guys I think more about, especially with Carl Joseph. I think of him more as a box safety, a guy really who can come up and run support and lay the wood to people. So I'm thinking about that other safety position, more of a center fielder type guy. Maybe an unknown commodity out of Southern Illinois, but from what I read, Jeremy Chin, he's a guy I'd look to maybe in that second or third round. So for Cleveland, they've done a lot of things right, still got some things to work on, and among those, again, I'm looking at left tackle, inside linebacker, and I think free safety.
Yeah, when it comes to the Browns, I guess I'm going to call us Siamese twins because it look like we are joining at the hip on this one. First, I'm going to go with the offensive line. He said Andrew Thomas, can't miss prospect, but I'm going to go with the other tackle that's highly rated here. I'm going to go with Jedrick Wills out of Alabama. Listen, if the Jets do somehow fumble this on the 1-yard line and he does come down to them, I think he will be an excellent pick, just like Jay said, to be on the other side of Jack Conklin to anchor that offensive line. And then I'm going to go to safety. When I look at safety, the one guy that really stuck out to me is a young man, Anton Whitfield Jr., coming out of Minnesota. If we remember, Minnesota came out of nowhere with that miraculous season they had this year, rowing the boat, and he was one of the anchors of that defense that was leading the nation in a couple of categories. And then when I look at inside linebacker, Jay mentioned this gentleman in the last when we was talking about the Bengals. I'm looking at Malik Harrison. I think if the Browns were somehow, some way able to get him and plug him in, he would fill a multitude of needs as far as being that leader and moving from side to side to help Mack Wilson, where Mack Wilson don't have to think about so much. And then that'll be a dynamic duo if you could put, Malik Harris with Mack Wilson to roam that middle portion of the defense. So that's how I seen it. Just pretty much like Jay, just in a different order. Offensive line, safety, and linebacker.
Yeah, I mean, again, no arguments here. I guess great minds do think alike. I mean, you look at that roster, and left tackle does look like a smoldering crater of a hole. I actually think that Mekhi Becton might be the pick here. Becton just seems like a guy that is a little bit more of a dice roll, but has potential to be the best left tackle of the draft with his measurables, and the way he performed at the combine was just extraordinary. And I feel like the Browns are a team that might be the ones willing to do it. I think that maybe Wirfs or Thomas or guys like that may be off the board by then. Depends kind of how that goes. But if Becton is there at 10, that just could be a guy I think the Browns could just kind of shake the dice and just throw him in there because they've done that the last few drafts. And other than that, I think interior linebacker is another concern. I'm thinking maybe something like a Jordan Brooks from Texas Tech, a 4-year guy, because you kind of want some experience to replace Schobert. And Brooks does have that, although he's not quite the same player. He's a little more of a hybrid between a weak side and an interior linebacker. So it depends kind of what the Browns like there. But he's got the 4.5 speed and the coverage skills where he could cover like Schobert did. So hopefully that defense wouldn't miss too much of a beat. So yeah, for the first 2 rounds of the Browns at 10 and 41, I think we're all kind of thinking the same thing. All right, Drink, let's get back to Pittsburgh. They don't have a first-round pick. They do pick at 49, and they have 6 picks total. So what are the Steelers going to be doing?
All right, so when I'm looking at Pittsburgh this year, up and down this year, if we would have had the 7 playoff format that we're going to have in the future, they would have made the playoffs, which is, a little outrageous, but it was what it was. I'm looking at wide receiver, and when I look at wide receiver, I see a young man out of USC go by the name of Michael Pittman. I think he's one of those underrated wide receivers because it's so many wide receivers. You tend to lose the guys that's not considered first-round picks, that's considered probably back end, second, top end, thirds, pretty much. And Michael Pittman is one of those guys. So I'm looking at him for their first pick. And then I go over the defensive tackle. I like the guy out of Missouri by the name of Jordan Elliott. I think he's a guy that could come in. He'll be a steal, underrated, could come in. He's a little raw. He's going to have to, I think it might take him a little longer than some of these other guys to get in the mix. But listen, he done played a lot of SEC ball. And if you're going to get somebody, get you one of those guys that play in the trenches of the SEC ball and let it rip, right? And then my third position would be running back. I think, hey, listen, that running back position been a little underwhelming since Le'Veon Bell decided, 1, he wasn't going to play, and then 2, he ended up leaving. Look, I know what people saying. James Conner, oh, man, he had that good year. Yeah. When you actually look at the numbers, though, I would ask you how good was the year really? Like, what did it translate to? I just don't think it's as good as what people hyped it up to be. So I would not be surprised if they go grab him a running back. And then when I'm looking at that, I'm looking at Cam Akers out of Florida State. I think he'll be a good. He's a thicker body. If you want to bring in a guy that you can pound and ground, or you want to bring in a guy and you want to do the 1-2 punch with James Conner, that works as well. And then you can move off James Conner and you can move Cam Akers as your number 1 back. So I really like the fit there. So yeah, I went wide receiver, defensive tackle, and running back for the Pittsburgh Steelers.
A little variance here. I do agree with you about defensive tackle. If you recall, Javon Hargrave exited to in-state Philadelphia. Got a nice contract from them. So nose tackle is a big need for them. And I'm looking for big people at that position. I'm looking at Davon Hamilton from Ohio State. He's a guy that could perhaps fit that role. Or maybe you go down to Lekai Fotu from Utah. Those are 2 of the more mammoth defensive tackles I'm looking at. That's what you need in a 3-4 defense. So, but as far as let me just offer just a little bit of pushback at wide receiver and running back. Because I think these guys get a little bit of a bad rap at the wide receiver position. Look, I like Juju Smith-Schuster. I think when you have your franchise quarterback go out week 1, I think that puts you behind the 8 ball in terms of showing what you can do in your first season as a number 1 option. And then those other guys back there, I told you about James Washington. I really like his upside. I think he came on a little bit down the stretch last season with amazingly so with the subpar quarterback play he was dealing with. And then Deontay Johnson, I think he's a really good number 3 guy. He made some really big plays for them last year. So I like that grouping. And the same thing at running back. I'm a little bit higher on James Conner than you did. I think health for both of those guys, Conner and Smith-Schuster, if they stay healthy, that's a big if. But I think they can do that. And plus, don't forget about Jalen Samuels and Benny Snell. So they got a really good rotation of guys back there. And if Big Ben, we believe he's coming back at least for this year healthy. I think we see the best of all those guys. So with those in mind, I'm looking at Ramon Foster, one of their guards, he retired. So I think maybe in that second round you get one of the better interior offensive linemen in Cesar Ruiz from Michigan who can fill that hole. And then back to Big Ben. This is what the Steelers are one of these teams I'm looking at that maybe need to think about, and they have been thinking about it with the Mason Rudolphs of the world, but I don't think any of us are sold on him. I think we've seen enough to know that he's probably not that dude. So maybe you look at another quarterback for the future. Maybe you look at a Jacob Eason out of Washington. That's where I'm at with the Steelers, quarterback, guard, and nose tackle.
Yeah, when I looked over their roster, it seemed like the interior offensive line stuck out a little bit more to me. Yeah, the receivers are, I think, on the outside looking in, could be a little questionable, but I think that it's one of those things where the team probably likes them more than maybe people on the outside looking in like them. So I would imagine if they do, it would be a late round, like kind of a flyer sort of deal. Interior offensive line that did surprise, besides Foster, you also have, I saw Stefan Wisniewski is still hanging out, but that dude's getting pretty up there in age. Pouncey isn't the youngest spring chicken around, so you're going to want to start to think about going into the future, what am I going to do with an interior offensive line? And yeah, a couple of guys you could put, besides Ruiz, you could put Solomon Kinley in there from Georgia or Shane LeMahieu from Oregon. They could both be guys you put in there and get some good production out of, or at least have something definitely you can work with in the future. And then, yeah, a lot of mock drafts are pulling up running back, and I don't know if they would go in second round, but I think it depends on what falls to them. I think, again, like if a Cam Akers or like, say, Clyde Edwards-Helaire falls down to them, they may go, hey, you know what, this guy's a real playmaker, and why not? But it would be a lot to invest because they already have invested a lot in that position over the last few years. But it wouldn't exactly blow my socks off. And yeah, I'd also agree that quarterback in like maybe the third or fourth round, they do have 2 fourth-round picks. That is something they want to address before the end of the draft when you're just basically spitballing and whatnot. So let's go ahead and finish up, Jay, with the Ravens. They have picks 28, 55, and 60 in the first 2 rounds. What are they going for?
Yeah, I think you guys should know where I'm going with these guys. We talked about this wide receiving crew for the Baltimore Ravens. It was substandard at best. We talk about guys like.
We lose you. You hear him, Drink?
Mm-mm.
Might have lost you for a sec, Jay. You want to go ahead and kick it, Drink? What do you got?
Yeah, hey, so with mines, man, like he said, I did go with wide receiver first. Let's be honest. The only threat that they really had was Hollywood Brown. Hollywood Brown can't do it all by himself. They got those 3 elite tight ends, 2 elite tight ends now. So you got to get somebody to help Hollywood Brown. This was Jordan Jefferson, in my opinion. This is where he would come in. Give Lamar Jackson someone else to throw to, a down the field threat or intermediate, however you want to look at it. That way Hollywood Brown can be the burner that he is, and you don't have both safeties and a cornerback and a half paying him attention because you don't have to worry about the whole other side of the field. Then with my second position, I went with inside linebacker. Listen, we do know that Ravens defense was good. Yes, it was. But that was more on the defensive line and the secondary. Their linebackers kind of slithered through. I mean, Judon, don't get me wrong, I don't want to disrespect Judon, but the other guys kind of just slimed their way through the season. It didn't really matter because we were so enamored with what the defensive line was doing and what Lamar Jackson was doing. We kind of like let them get a pass. Well, listen, in the draft, you can address that. You don't have to worry about nobody slithering. Go ahead and go get you a Malik Harris out of Ohio State. Get you a young stud if he falls down to you. And I would think they would take wide receiver first, but you just never know. You don't know how these people are strategizing in those war rooms. And then, like always, I think you can always use the inside offensive lineman. I'm looking at Matt Hennessy out of Temple, somebody else to help you control that line of scrimmage. So when Lamar Jackson and Mark Ingram and Gus Edwards decide they want to just pound the ball play after play after play, get you a fresh, big, ugly in that trench to clear the way for you and do it like that. So with a team that run the ball so much, that is very, very important. So, yeah, I went wide receiver, inside linebacker, and then inside lineman, offensive lineman. Jay, did you want to run yours over?
Yeah, back to what I was saying about wide receiver. I'm thinking more of the later rounds for this, and I'm thinking about a guy who may complement a Marquise Brown because we know he can take the top off the defense. So I'm thinking about some bigger body receivers, maybe in the third, fourth round range. I'm thinking about Colin Johnson from Texas. I'm also thinking about Chase Claypool from Notre Dame. And then earlier round, maybe a Denzel Mims out of Baylor if they win in the first or second round. But I definitely think wide receiver is a huge need for them, and in the interest of Lamar Jackson's development, I think that would be a big deal for them. I'm also with you on the interior of the offensive line. When we consider, just like the Steelers, they had a stalwart on their line retiring, Marshall Yanda. So I'm thinking about Lloyd Cushenberry out of LSU could be a guy you look to come in and replace Yanda. And then your inside linebacker point is well taken, because I was talking about that earlier with you as well. And there's just like, who even played inside linebacker? None of these names are even ringing a bell. I'm still thinking C.J. Mosley's on the team. But I'm also thinking about the outside linebacker. I'd like to have a guy who you can throw out there on the other side of Matthew Judon to further generate more pass rush. And I'm thinking about maybe Julian Okwara out of Notre Dame, who would fit that 3-4 system. So with that in mind, give Lamar Jackson more help on the outside of wide receiver. Get that guard position figured out with Yanda out of there, and a little more pass rush from me on the outside.
Yeah, picking at 28, you're in that position where there's still a lot of quality guys, but you kind of have to see what falls to you. Oftentimes positions get ran on, and then a couple always, inevitably, there's a position or two that didn't get ran on, and you might have to adjust fire a little bit. We definitely know the Ravens have the ability to be one of the teams that kind of sits back and just takes whoever the best player available. But yeah, if you're looking at a shopping list, if Kenneth Murray falls to them, and I raved about him yesterday with the Eagles, but if he manages to slip to Baltimore, he's got Raven written all over him. Is that physical, nasty, dirty, not dirty, but you know what I mean, that gritty play style just really jumps out at me. But another guy is Patrick Queen from LSU. He kind of plays like that. He's a good 3-down, can kind of do it all linebacker, but he's got enough size in there to help him out, keeping that real beefy front seven that the Ravens are always known for. So at 28, if you have those guys there, I think they'll think about it. And then, yeah, wide receiver is another one, and I absolutely agree with you, Jay. I think you're looking for a bigger guy. And Drink too, you're kind of the same boat, And I think I'm thinking of a guy. If I'm looking at the Ravens, I'm looking at film. I want a guy that can block well, because a lot of times you're having this sort of not really triple option offense, but when a lot of times your receivers in this offense are going to be asked to block more than the typical wide receiver would. So a guy maybe like Donovan Peoples-Jones from Michigan or something, like a bigger guy. But if I was studying film and thinking about who I was going to draft with those 2 second-round picks, that'd be something I'd be watching for really closely.